I want to bring in Dr. James Baker, the founding director of the Mary H. Weiser Food Allergy Center. Dr. Baker, welcome to Prime.
Nice to be here.
Okay, so we just heard that report, and hearing the new CDC guidance, obviously that's great news, but there is still a lot of confusion, and the agency's guidance has changed in the past. Can we be totally confident that we can be unmasked in most indoor settings if we're vaccinated at this point?
Well, I think the data clearly shows several things. Number one, infection really doesn't get transmitted outside, so there's no reason for anyone to wear a mask outside anymore. That data is very clear. Inside, once 50% of the population has at least one dose of the vaccine, they don't infect. And in fact, rates of infection drop precipitously. This was shown in Israel and has now been shown in several of the states here. So I think that people can feel very comfortable that once they get about 50% of the population vaccinated, they'll be safe. The people who remain at risk are those that won't get vaccinated or can't be vaccinated because they have a medical problem or an immune issue. And I think the issues with children are going to resolve. They're going to get vaccinated. And the youngest children really have the least risk from either being infected with COVID or catching illness. So I think the bottom line is what we're going to see is a progressive lessening of these restrictions over the next 6 weeks. And by midsummer, they'll be gone.
What about situations like planes and public transportation? Do you expect masks to be required indefinitely in those circumstances?
I don't believe it'll be indefinitely, but I think there'll have to be a transition period. Certainly until we get at least 50% of the population in the U.S. immunized, then we need to be very careful about closed areas where the virus can be transmitted. But the really important thing, the data that's out now shows that people who are vaccinated not only don't get sick, but don't transmit to people who aren't. So in fact, if you get the vaccine, you've not only protected yourself, but you've protected those around you.
So yesterday we had some news about Bill Maher. He actually contracted COVID after being fully vaccinated. So should we be worried about the variants that are jumping the vaccine? We hear about these cases from time to time.
Well, I don't think this was a variant issue. I think it's the fact that 5% of the people who get the vaccine still get infected. But the important thing is Bill Maher wasn't sick. He didn't even know that he was infected until they found the virus in his nose. And in fact, they found very small amounts of the virus in his nose. So he actually showed that the vaccine worked. It kept him from getting ill. And the small amount of virus that he was carrying probably wouldn't have infected anyone else.
What about in workplace and social settings? When we talk about etiquette, vaccine etiquette, what's the best way to ask if everyone's been vaccinated? What about people who choose not to get the vaccine?
Well, I think the burden is going to go on to the people who have not gotten the vaccine. They're going to have to raise the issue when they're in situations, and they will have to protect themselves. So this is a real change. You know, before we were protecting everyone. Now I think it's people who aren't vaccinated or can't be vaccinated that need to speak up and identify they aren't and that they're at risk. And most of those people will have to protect themselves with a mask, and probably a mask that really protects them from getting any virus inhaled. So the burden is going to shift to the people that aren't vaccinated.
All right, Dr. Baker, thank you very much for clearing some of that up for us.
Thank you.